spinning. Okay, you're on.
All right. Okay, well, this week we're up with lecture 7. We may or may not make it through to the end. It just kind of depends, but we'll see. I'm going to start with name changes. We left off with Maimonides, with the 613 laws and all that kind of stuff, if you recall. And so now I'm going to start talking about name changes. There is a strong possibility that almost all Jewish by the Catholic Church, of course, we're talking about the New Testament letters. There is a good example of this happening in Acts chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. Verse 33 provides a name for this person, while verse 34 tells us he was a Jew. A knee-jerk reaction to this might be to say that he was Jewish by his mother, but named after his Greek father, common at the time. And while this kind of thing no doubt happened, and did at least once in the New Testament letters, although I think it could be argued otherwise, it is more likely that these names were simply changed to an equivalent Greek or Latin name because of the order given by Constantine in his Passover letter to separate from everything Jewish. Here's some excerpts from that letter. Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd, for we have received from our Savior a different way, and withdraw ourselves from all participation in their, speaking of the Jews, baseness. It was needful that this matter should be rectified, so that we might have nothing in common with that nation of parricides. Yeah, you can read about that in Eusebius's Vitae Constantini. It's in 318 through 20 if you want to read it. We know that the tax collector called by Yeshua to be a Talmudim, or to be a Talmud rather, to be a disciple, was actually named Levi, because his Hebrew name was given in Luke chapter 5, verse 27, though he was called Matthew by the English translators. We also know that in the first century CE, no Jew would have listened to the teaching of a non-Jew or recent convert to Judaism concerning the Torah. Political correctness did not exist in that time among this people, our people. We know that Yeshua did not have two Greek brothers, even though the text gives us two Greek names. And he did not have two Greek disciples, even though the text gives us Greek names. I could give more examples, such as Shaul, who was called Paulos, and eventually Paul, but I think you get the point. I told you earlier that I would talk about the name Luke. It is a good example of what I have been talking about just now. The name Laucus, which is where we get the name Luke, means light bringer, light bearer. Thus, it is likely that his Hebrew name was Aharon, or Aaron. Given that Aaron was teaching the Torah, it would be more likely that he was a doctor of the Torah, as it's called in English, rather than a doctor of medicine. Yeshua is quoted as saying, "They that are whole need not a physician." You can find that in Matthew 9:12, Mark 2:17, and Luke 5:31. The English word physician is a Western construct that did not exist in the time of the New Testament letters. So here we have a false reality. They're thinking this guy is a medical doctor. They didn't have medical doctors in the first century. The Greek word used in these quotes is iatros, which means healing or healer. Iatros was a generic word used both of Jewish prophets who healed, like Yeshua, but also of charlatans who used trickery and worthless potions, snake oil. Thus, the verses should be translated as, they that are whole do not need healing, or they that are whole do not need a healer. Physicians, the word physician, was used in Jeremiah, chapter 8, verse 22, in the King James Version of the Bible. The text says, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there?" It should say, "There is no balm in Gilead," as it was not a question. There is no balm in Gilead if there is no healer there. Or it could be said, I thought I had this two different ways. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? It should say, there is no balm in Gilead if there is no healer there. Okay. The Hebrew word translated as physician is rophe, which means healer and has nothing to do with a medical doctor. Thus, physician is a word from the wrong time period, and its use, as I said, created yet another false reality. I have found no evidence that the title Doctor of the Law existed in the Second Temple period. Wait, I read it in my Bible. Yeah, your English Bible, a translation. The Greek text doesn't say that. Scribes and rabbim were both called nomodidaskaloi in numerous Greek texts of the Second Temple period. If their education was the equivalent of a modern doctorate degree, the title would have been Rav, R-A-V, V like Victor, meaning master, not didaskalos, which is your root word, of course, and it means teacher. The Greek words nomodidaskalos, nomodidaskaloi, and didaskalon, you can look at them in Acts 5:34, Luke 2:46, and Luke 5:17, respectively, are all derivatives of didaske. Some people pronounce that didaske. It means teach or teacher. In short, they were teachers of the Torah. Yeshua was not called a physician at any time. He was called a Navi, which of course is a prophet. He was called More, which means teacher in Hebrew, of course. And he was called Rav, rabbi. Finally, Luke was not called a great physician. He wasn't. That's English. In Greek, he was called O iatros, O agapetos. Hear agape there? He was called beloved healer. He was not called great physician. The word for great's not even there. He was called beloved healer. Let's talk about the word it. Depends on what the meaning of it is. Some of you will get that reference. When Jews want to say it, it, it was nice, it, they say who. If the object is masculine, which literally means he, like he was over there, but is nonetheless being used for the word it in English translations. If the object is feminine, they say heave or who, which literally means she for the word it. For example, in John 4:34, it should say, "My food is to perform the purpose for which I have come and to complete the work of it." What's the it? The purpose for which he has come. But it instead says, "My food is to perform the purpose for which I am sent and to complete the work of him," with a capital H. Wow. Thus, the failure of translators to recognize this subtle nuance and the proper use of "am sent" as opposed to "have come," which is what he actually said, created another altered reality, which in due course added to the creation of the Christian Trinity. At times, it became a person called the Father, instead of the origin from which Yeshua came, heaven. At other times, it became a person called the Spirit, instead of an object we now call the Hebrew Bible. We'll get to that, I think, unless I've already done that. I don't remember. Let's talk about adding to or taking away from scriptures. Translators took words and phrases from different letters and added them to others in an attempt to make the stories and parables more similar and to correct what they thought were mistakes because of the differences. However, each Rav, each rabbi, each shelichim, each apostle, I did say rabbi, right? They purposely told their story and or their mashal, their parable, differently to make it his own. He would learn it one way, and then he would go out and teach it another to make it his own, right? There are times when they just repeated what their Rav told them, but they always tell you that. If they're telling the story as part of a message, they just tell it their way. This is still going on to this day. That's very common in Judaism. All right. So they did this to make it their own and to direct their listeners' attention to that person's particular point at that particular time. This means that the same Rav or rabbi might tell the same story differently multiple times to make different points in different situations. Translators attempt to match the stories and or meshalim, the parables, have caused readers to miss the different points. And while we're on that subject, there is no single meaning to any idiom. For example, one person might say, "I buy ink by the gallon," meaning that he spends an enormous amount of time writing poetry. Someone else may use the same idiom to indicate that he or she writes for a living. A third person might use the idiom to mean that he actually does purchase ink by the gallon because he owns the print shop that prints all the works written by the others. Thus, any attempt to make every occurrence of the same idiom mean the same thing is an invalid approach, since the writers of these letters did this very thing. The same problem exists with single words. The Hebrew word bo means come and go. There is no difference between the two in biblical Hebrew or first century Hebrew, since you cannot go somewhere without coming to that place. Conversely, you cannot come to a place without having to go somewhere. Thus, in one passage telling the same, or it's two different passages telling the same story. One of them says he came from Jericho, while the other one says he was going to Jericho. Apologists thus surmised that there were two Jerichos, and this explains the discrepancy. We will probably find out that the two different places called Jericho either did not exist in the same time period, or that one of them was never actually called Jericho, except by someone who did not know what he or she was talking about. The word law in English, or nomos in Greek, is almost always translated as law. That didn't make any sense. The word law is almost always translated. I think I meant the word nomos is almost always translated as law. However, the nomos of and we think of of course, the law of God, but nomos is used of a husband, his law over his wife. It's used of parents, their law over their children. It's used of the government, which is a very different kind of law, and it's also used of God's law. See, be careful what you're tying together there. I want to talk about the writing style of the New Testament letters, but I want to take us through the writing style of the Torah itself, because we're going to find out there is an astounding connection here. In his book, The Documentary Hypothesis, and then in parentheses it says, and the composition of the Pentateuch, Pentateuch being the 5 books of the Bible, five, the Torah. Umberto Moshe Cassuto pointed out that the documentary hypothesis actually originated with Witter, a guy named Witter, in 1711, who believed that ancient poetic works existed before the writing of the Torah, and that Moshe used these works in the development of his own. Witter was correct about that. Witter's work was not widely received. In fact, it really wasn't received at all. It passed into directly, do not pass go, do not collect $100. They went directly into file 13. Some of you will know that idiom. However, 4 years later, in 1715, a French, is that word dilettante?
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like dilettante to me. I don't speak French. A French dilettante whose name was Abbe de Albignac. Albignac. I have no idea how you pronounce French words. He wrote a similar work on the poems of Homer, concluding that Homer's poems were not a single work, but a blending of several different sources. For his work, de Albignac became known as the father of the Homeric problem. Wow. 38 years later, in 1753, a French physician, now this would be a real doctor, not a Bible scholar, whose name was Ostrach, also published a book on the documentary hypothesis. So this is a long time from Whittier. Ostrach took Whittier's concept further and concluded that there were two sources and several fragments that were combined to Genesis, other of the documentary hypothesis instead of Witter. Cassuto wrote that a professional German scholar took de Albignac's work and transformed it into a completely systematized theory. I am not sure if the German was Eichhorn or not. He couldn't tell by what he wrote. But he went on to say that Eichhorn published an introductory work on the Torah, claiming that the Torah was developed from a limited number of sources. So this idea of the Torah being put together, being a combination of a whole bunch of different sources, came from a medical doctor not a biblical scholar. And he did this. Let's see if what's his name did his in the 1795. So this almost had to have been early 1800s. Yeah, so it hasn't been around very long, right? Where was I? Blah, blah, blah. Casuto also said that a scholar named Wolfe wrote a book in 1795 called Prolegomena ad Homeruum, Homer, declaring, as Casuto put it, that the Homeric epics were conceived as an amalgam, God, I know I was going to say that wrong, amalgam of numerous small, unconnected poems of separate origin. This theory by de Albignac was essentially the same theory put forth by Witter and Ostrich concerning the construction of the Torah. At the time of Casuto's lectures, from which the aforementioned booklet was written, he explained the breakdown of the belief in this theory as follows. The so-called J document, and that's J for Taoist, the earlier of the four was the account that had been formulated by scribes of the court of Judea, which used the name, and he writes out YHWH, which is completely wrong. It'd be YHVH, as in Yahweh. They used that from the beginning of the story of creation. The E document, so-called, had been produced by their rivals in the northern kingdom following the fall of Samaria in the late 8th century BCE. Wellhausen surmised a redactor had melded the two accounts, and the E, of course, is Elohist. They're speaking of the word Elohim, according to which the Tetragrammaton, which is YHVH, was first revealed to Moses, and hence it employed the designation Elohim in all the narratives preceding the revelation of God to Moses on Mount Horeb. The D document, comprising most of the books of Deuteronomy, had been composed by scribes in Judea in the time of Josiah, toward the close of the First Temple period in the late 7th or early 6th century BCE. The P document had been authored by temple priests early on in the Second Temple era, following the return from exile, late 6th to early 5th century BCE. Each document, claimed Wellhausen, was characterized by its own theory, politics, language, and style. P, or priestly code, which emanated from priestly circles and also refrained from mentioning the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, before the generation of Moses. So you follow that. They're saying that there was a document that they call the J document. Then there's a document called the E document. And then there's one called the D document. And then there's one called the P document. And they took all of these plus a few other little tidbits here and there, and somebody came in and put it all together as one work. Why would they do that? Well, because by then, Jewish sages had decided that God would not repeat himself. They just made that rule up and went with it. It's not in the Torah, but that's what they decided. And God doesn't repeat himself. Look at all these repeats. You follow what I'm saying? Mostly that. Casuto's explanation as to why the documentary hypothesis is why it is utterly wrong is as follows. First and foremost, the issue, as Casuto saw it, was confirmation bias, in that those who followed this line of thinking began their work believing that the Torah was a compilation of numerous works and thus their research tended to ignore information in conflict with their beliefs and concentrated on information that agreed with their beliefs. In the introduction of Casuto's book, it says, and I quote, "What had been construed as contradictions, repetitions, and variants were in fact literary tools succinctly conveying polyphonous meaning," or harmonious. Casuto saw within the Torah the literary devices of harmony, wordplay, assonance, which is repeating, and consonance, elliptic and dramatic structure, and retrospection. So what he saw was he saw harmony. He felt that the repetition was on purpose. He felt that elliptic, it's not a circle, that's like an oval. So it's to circle back on itself. That's one way to look at that word, but he may be using that here. I'm not really sure. When you use these big words with multiple meanings, it's sometimes hard to tell because he's already said assonance. So I don't understand why elliptic is here unless he's using it in a different way. But anyway, he's over my head. But he's saying that all that, the repeats, in one place, it's like giving you a little bit of information, and in the other place, it's giving you a lot of information. That was consonants. All of these different things, he's saying all of that was done on purpose. Casuto argued the variation in divine names within a single work was commonplace in the literature of the biblical period. Similarly, whereas source critics had assumed that authors of all ages would never disagree and would neither repeat nor contradict themselves, that's what that other word meant, Casuto demonstrated elliptical, as he said it, can also mean, what was that word I was just on? Contradict. Coming back on itself, you say it one way and you come back and say it another. Anyway, Casuto demonstrated that these premises imposed canons of modern literary conventions upon bodies of literature to which they were entirely foreign. Indeed, it has since been shown that many phenomena that were fodder for the source critics have emerged in the temple scrolls found at Qumran, a work universally attributed to one author. Why? Well, because his name was on all of them. You don't get that with the Torah, right? So you can say, oh, a whole bunch of different people wrote it. And we know this because there's all these repeats and all these contradictions and all these blah, 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 blah. Yet he points out, Casuto points out, the stuff written at Qumran is written in the exact same manner. Exact same manner, and we know it was written by one guy because his name's on all of them. He signed them. The reason why I bring this up is because I find that the Gospels also utilized this Ugaritic or Mesopotamian writing style. For example, in the letter of Levi, known as Matthew, there are supposedly two different events in which Yeshua fed people. First, a group of 5,000, and second, a group of 4,000. I would stipulate here that these events are one and the same. In Levi, or Matthew 14:16, it says, and this is speaking of Yeshua, and he said to them, they do not need to leave. You give them something to eat. Because they'd come to him and said, hey, we better send all these people away. They're all going to get hungry here pretty soon. But they, the Talmudim, his disciples, said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Matthew 15:32, it says, and then Yeshua called his Talmudim, saying, I have compassion on the crowd. Realize this is the second telling of the same story. I have compassion on the crowd, for they have now been with us 3 days and have nothing to eat. and I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint in the way. And his Talmudim, his disciples, said to him, where in the wilderness will we find bread enough to fill a crowd this large? There were 5 loaves, 2 fish, and 5,000 men, not including women and children in the first story, and 7 loaves and a few small fish and 4,000 men, not including women and children in the second telling. In the second story, there are more loaves, more fish, less people. How on earth, just a short time later, we're talking 1 chapter later, I know 1 chapter can be 15 years apart. That happens in Acts, but not here. Anyway, how is it that the Talmudim would not know this second time, if it is the second time, that Yeshua could feed the people? How do they not know this? He's already seen them feed a bigger crowd with less, and now they don't somehow know, just perhaps even just days later, they don't know that he can do this? It is utterly ludicrous to think that they would have reacted in this manner the second time. Ludicrous. I would argue that there are at least 3 possibilities. 1, the number of fish, loaves, and bread and people may well have been identical in both occurrences of the story in the original text, but were changed by a translator who saw these as 2 different events because they were chronologically out of sync. We've spoken about chronological order not even existing to this group of people. Yes, it's going to be out of sync. There is a connection here. It is association, remember, not chronology. 2, the memories of Levi and others had diminished at such an advanced age when they were writing their stories. 3, Jewish numerology was used in these stories and thus confused the translators. You see what probably happened? Let's move on to dictionaries and lexicons. Meanings that did not exist in the time of the Bible are found in all biblical dictionaries and lexicons. Did you hear what I just said? Meanings that you find in your dictionary, in your Strong's, Young's, Gesenius, or BDB, or any of the other ones, meanings that did not exist in the biblical period are in those books. They are wrong. Additionally, the meanings of words in dictionaries change over time. If you look at a dictionary from the 1700s and compare the words to words in a dictionary from the 1600s, which, by the way, I did, that's how I know this, you'll find that ideas have been added in the latter dictionaries. In fact, the further you go back in time, the less meaning for the words that you will find. They say less and less and less the further back you go. For example, very early biblical dictionaries and lexicons say absolutely nothing about male prostitutes when giving the meaning of a harlot. That's the nice word for it. This is because it had no connection to the biblical idea. Eventually, someone thought to themselves, guys are prostitutes. Oop, I meant harlots. And subsequently added the new idea to their dictionary. I believe that happened in the 1700s and wasn't in the 1600s, if memory serves, which don't rely on mine. Anyway, Proverbs 26:22 says, words of a backbiter. Your English probably says whisperer, but that means backbiter, are swallowed down greedily. Mitla hamim, greedily. Or in Greek, malakoi, same thing, greedily. They go down in the innermost parts. It says in the deepest place in the heart, in the innermost parts. Words of a backbiter are swallowed down greedily and go down to the innermost part of the heart. Doesn't that sound like what there is a movie that just recently was released. What was the name of that thing? Dadgum, I can't think of it. Police State. There's a clip from that movie where this very elderly man who had an apartment of his own living in New York, I think, and his mother, very, very elderly mother, because I mean, he's up there, so she must be in her 90s, was still alive at the time, and he would go over to her house and sleep on her couch when she needed extra help and stuff like that. And he went to the Capitol on January 6th. Now, he was never anywhere near the Capitol. He started off down from where he was. He couldn't see Donald Trump, but he could hear him. And he heard him saying, go march peacefully and patriotically. And so he just started following the crowd. But as he got closer to the crowd, something just didn't feel right. Something wasn't right. It seemed like people were getting a little too upset, and he turned around and left. Well, guess what happened to him? He's at his mother's house. She has been taken to a assisted living place. She needed some help. Someone needed she needed a nurse to oversee her for a while. And he was actually staying at her house. He didn't say why, but he woke up one morning to the FBI, just obliterating her front door. They came in, they arrested him, they put him in jail. They destroyed his mother's apartment, and while another team was destroying his apartment, they drug him out in his PJs, let's just say underclothing, because it really wasn't PJs, in handcuffs. And the next thing you know, his neighbors are talking to the camera saying, I just can't believe it. I just never dreamed that he was this radical, lunatic. Words of a backbiter, that being the FBI or the reporter, I'm not sure who, they're swallowed down greedily, and they go to the innermost parts. He had several of his friends and neighbors get in front of the camera and say things like that. Yeah, people are really quick to want to believe terrible things about people they've known for years because the backbiter's words are swallowed down greedily. In 1 Corinthians 6:9, sorry, I'm having a really bad cramp in my foot at the moment. It translates the same Greek word, malakoi, to mean effeminate. So we're going from swallowed down greedily to effeminate. Sound like a problem here to you? Which modern lexicons translate to mean kept man or homosexual. But this word is idiomatically used of being greedy. It's greedily swallowed down. It's for the word greedy. But look what they've done with that word. Malachi 2:1 says, "Woe to them who do wickedness and devise evil upon their beds." In English. I would translate that, "Woe to them who do wickedness and devise evil in their leisure time," because that's what that idiom means. It goes on, "They execute it in the morning light because," and in English translations, it says, man, it doesn't really say that. I'm not sure what the English translation says, but the literal words would be, "There are to God hands." Obviously an idiom, right? Makes no sense. What that means is they are against God. So woe to them who do wickedness and devise evil in their leisure time. They execute it in the morning light because they are against God. That's a proper translation. The deeds of wickedness are actually devised in their leisure or downtime. The evil deed is actually done the next morning, not in the bed. You get it? Not in the bed, but they devise these things in the bed and then follow through with them the next morning. In this verse, arsenokoitai literally means man sitting on a couch, or it could be translated man lying in a bed. It is used idiomatically for a slothful man. However, it is easy to see why the words devise evil upon their beds would be connected to something sexual by someone who is unfamiliar with the idiom. You see what happened here? Oh, I forgot to start the wacky-do.
You got 20 minutes left.
Wow. I thought I was going to talk about some of these things a lot more than I did. Apparently, I was worried about time, and so I was just really rushing through it. So I'm going to have to call it there. I ran out of stuff to to talk about. Shalom and shalom, everyone.
The blessing, Be'ivrit. Yahweh Beyish Meracha. Ya'er Yahweh Panai Velecha Vihunacha. Yisa Yahweh Panai Velecha Veyasim Lecha Shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.